Elena Reyes stood in the climate-controlled conference room of the Sandoval Federal Building, her work-stained hands gripping documents that could revolutionize agriculture forever. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the desert landscape that had shaped her entire life, now threatened by forces beyond drought or market prices. 48 hours ago, she'd been fixing a broken-down Tesla on Highway 70 with nothing but determination and a rusty toolbox, never imagining that act of kindness would lead her here, facing the most powerful agricultural corporation in the Southwest. Now, with NASA's top scientists flanking her and AgriCorp's executives glaring from across the polished table, Elena had to make a choice that would determine not just her family's survival, but the future of farming itself. The proposal, in her hands, wasn't just about saving Sunset Mesa Farm. It was about humanity's next giant leap. Before we dive into Elena's extraordinary journey from desert farmland to the frontier of space agriculture, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments below. And if stories of unexpected destiny and scientific breakthroughs inspire you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena adjusted the solar panel angle on the irrigation pump, squinting against the New Mexico sun that had been brutal even by desert standards this July. At 26, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent her life making broken things work again. The half-finished mechanical engineering degree from UNM might be gathering dust, but its principles lived in every repair she made on Sunset Mesa Farm. The morning heat shimmered off the red earth as she checked the moisture sensors she'd installed throughout their drought-resistant millet fields. Each reading confirmed what she already knew: they were running out of time. The experimental irrigation system she'd designed was keeping their crops alive, but barely. Without significant rainfall or a miracle, they'd lose everything by season's end. Her father, Carlos, emerged from the equipment shed, his face etched with worry lines that seemed to deepen daily. The foreclosure notice from Riverside Community Bank had arrived yesterday, giving them 90 days before 3 generations of Reyes family farming would end. Elena had found him sitting at the kitchen table at dawn, staring at the document like it was written in a foreign language. Unlike the massive AgriCorp operations that surrounded them, Sunset Mesa Farm had survived on innovation and stubbornness. While neighboring properties sold out to Victoria Blackstone's agricultural empire, the Reyes family had adapted. They'd switched to heritage crops that required less water, implemented Elena's solar power systems, and developed techniques that merged traditional Hispanic farming methods with modern technology. But AgriCorp had been systematically acquiring every farm in Luna County, and their methods weren't always above board. Strange irrigation failures plagued the holdout farmers. Wells that had produced water for decades suddenly went dry. Crop diseases appeared in patterns too precise to be natural. Elena had documented everything, but without proof, her suspicions remained just that. The distinctive whine of an electric motor interrupted her thoughts. On Highway 70, visible from their elevated position, a white Tesla Model S had pulled onto the shoulder, hood raised and hazard lights blinking. Elena watched for a moment, expecting the driver to call for roadside assistance like most stranded travelers. Instead, a man in casual clothes emerged and began examining the engine compartment with obvious frustration. Elena sighed, wiping her hands on her jeans. Desert Springs was 25 miles east, and cell service was notoriously spotty along this stretch. She grabbed her toolbox from the ATV and headed down the access road. Growing up here had taught her that helping stranded motorists wasn't just courtesy, it was survival ethics in a landscape that didn't forgive mistakes. The man looked up as she approached, relief evident on his face. He appeared to be in his early 50s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind designer glasses. Despite the casual attire, something about his bearing suggested he was used to more formal settings. "Car trouble?" Elena called out, stating the obvious as she set down her tools. "Apparently, these things aren't as maintenance-free as advertised," he replied with a rueful smile. "I'm getting overheating warnings, but I can't identify the issue." Elena peered into the compartment, immediately spotting the problem. "Your coolant pumps failed. Common issue in high-temperature environments." She pulled out her multimeter. "The desert's brutal on electric vehicles. Most people don't realize these systems need different maintenance out here." The stranger watched with interest as she worked. "You seem to know your way around technology, not what I expected to find on a rural highway." "Mechanical engineering student once upon a time," Eleanor explained, testing connections. "Had to leave school when? Well, when life happened. But machines are machines, whether they're tractors or Teslas." "Marcus Chen," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "I appreciate you stopping. I have a rather important meeting in Los Alamos tomorrow." Elena accepted the handshake, noting his firm grip and calloused palms, not the soft hands of someone who worked exclusively behind a desk. "Elena Reyes, Sunset Mesa Farm, just up the ridge. The pump's definitely shot, but I might be able to rig a temporary fix. There's an auto parts store in Desert Springs that should have what you need for a proper repair." As she worked, Marcus asked questions that revealed more than casual curiosity. He understood engineering principles, recognized the modifications she suggested, and seemed particularly interested when she mentioned adapting solar technology for agricultural use. "Your farm runs on solar?" he inquired, genuine interest in his voice. "Mostly. I designed a system that powers our irrigation pumps and monitoring equipment. It's not perfect, but it's kept us going through the drought." She didn't mention how close to failure they were, or that her innovations might not be enough to save them. An hour later, Eleanor had the Tesla running again, though she warned Marcus to take it easy and get the proper replacement parts soon. As she packed her tools, he studied the farm visible on the ridge above them. "That's impressive terracing," he observed. "Natural erosion control, combined with water retention techniques my grandmother taught me. Hispanic farmers have been working this land for centuries. We've learned to adapt." Elena followed his gaze. Though lately adaptation isn't enough. Something in her tone made Marcus turn back to her. "Challenging times for small farms everywhere, especially when you're competing against corporations with unlimited resources." The bitterness crept into her voice before she could stop it. "AgriCorp's been buying up every farm in the county. Those who won't sell face mysterious difficulties." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've heard similar stories in other regions. Corporate consolidation rarely benefits local communities." He reached for his wallet. "Please let me pay you for your time and expertise." Elena waved him off. "Just helping a traveler. Dessert and code." "Then at least let me buy you dinner in Desert Springs. I'd like to hear more about your solar innovations, professional curiosity." She hesitated, then agreed. There was something about Marcus Chen that intrigued her beyond his obvious intelligence. The way he'd examined her work, asked specific questions about sustainable farming. It suggested knowledge that went deeper than casual interest. At the Desert Rose Cafe, over green chili enchiladas, their conversation ranged from engineering to agriculture to the challenges facing rural communities. Marcus revealed he worked in research and development, though he remained vague about specifics. Elena found herself sharing more than intended about Sunset Mesa Farm's struggles and her dreams of combining traditional methods with cutting-edge technology. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The irony is, I have dozens of ideas that could revolutionize small-scale farming. she said, sketching diagrams on a napkin. Integrated sensor networks, AI-driven crop management, closed-loop water systems. But implementation requires capital. We don't have, and banks won't lend to farms our size anymore. Marcus studied her sketches with increasing interest. These concepts are remarkably sophisticated. Have you considered patent applications? With what money? Besides, AgriCorp has teams of lawyers who'd bury any small inventor in legal challenges. She crumpled the napkin. Sometimes I think they're just waiting us out. Once we're gone, they'll probably implement similar systems and claim innovation. Not if someone else validates your work first, Marcus said quietly. He seemed to make a decision. Elena, I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my work. I'd like to visit your farm tomorrow if you're willing. There might be opportunities you haven't considered. That night, Elena researched Marcus Chen online, but found surprisingly little. Just vague references to government research projects and agricultural studies. Whatever his real work entailed, it was well-protected information. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Sunset Mesa Farm in a rental SUV, accompanied by two colleagues he introduced as Dr. Sarah Whitfield and Dr. James Holloway. Their rental vehicle, Elena noticed, had government plates. As they toured the property, the visitors' questions became increasingly specific. They examined her irrigation system with professional intensity, photographed her soil conservation methods, and seemed particularly interested in her integration of traditional techniques with modern technology. The moisture retention in these terraces is remarkable, Dr. Whitfield noted, checking readings on a sophisticated handheld device. You're achieving results that match our lab simulations for arid environment cultivation. Dr. Holloway was equally impressed by the solar array. This power management system is ingenious. You're maximizing efficiency with minimal resources. He turned to Marcus. It's exactly what we've been looking for. Elena finally confronted them directly. Okay, who are you really? This isn't casual scientific interest. Marcus exchanged glances with his colleagues, then pulled out his identification. Dr. Marcus Chen, Director of Agricultural Innovation, NASA Johnson Space Center. Dr. Whitfield heads our Botanical Research Division, and Dr. Holloway leads Sustainable Systems Engineering. Elena stared at the badge. NASA? What does the space agency want with a failing farm in New Mexico? We're not here about your farm's financial status, Marcus explained. We're developing Project Oasis, Orbital Agricultural Sustainability Initiative Systems. The goal is to create self-sustaining food production for long-term space missions and eventual Mars colonization. Your integration of traditional techniques with modern technology, your ability to maximize resources in extreme conditions, it's exactly what we need. The revelation left Elena speechless. Dr. Whitfield continued, we've been searching for someone who understands both practical farming and engineering principles. Your innovations here mirror what we'll need in space: closed-loop systems, minimal resource waste, adaptation to harsh environments. We'd like to offer you a position with Project Oasis, Marcus said. Your knowledge could help feed astronauts on Mars, but there's more. He glanced toward the AgriCorp facilities, visible in the distance. We've been investigating corporate practices that threaten agricultural diversity and innovation. Your documentation of their activities here could be valuable. Before Elena could process this information, dust clouds announced approaching vehicles. 3 black SUVs bearing AgriCorp logos pulled up to the farmhouse. Robert Sterling, the regional manager, emerged with several security personnel. Ms. Reyes, Sterling called out, his voice carrying false pleasantry. I see you have visitors, federal employees, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Sterling, Marcus stepped forward. I wasn't aware AgriCorp monitored private property visits. Sterling's Smile didn't reach his eyes. We protect our interests, and when federal agencies suddenly show interest in properties adjacent to our operations, we take notice. He turned to Elena. I hope you're not spreading unfounded allegations about our company. Documentation of systematic well failures and crop diseases following suspicious patterns isn't unfounded, Elena replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Sterling's expression darkened. Careful, Ms. Reyes. Defamation lawsuits can be costly, especially for struggling farms facing foreclosure. Actually, Dr. Holloway interjected, NASA has particular interest in preserving agricultural knowledge that might benefit our space program. Threatening our potential consultants would be inadvisable. The confrontation escalated as Sterling demanded to know what data the NASA team had collected. Marcus remained calm but firm, citing federal authority and ongoing investigations into corporate practices affecting national food security. After Sterling departed with thinly veiled threats, the NASA team revealed their full proposal. They wanted Elena to join Project Oasis as a consultant, bringing her practical knowledge to their space agriculture program. Additionally, they were prepared to investigate AgriCorp's activities as part of a broader inquiry into corporate threats to agricultural innovation. Your farm could become a test site for technologies we develop, Marcus explained. Funding would be provided, ensuring Sunset Mesa survives while contributing to humanity's future in space. The next weeks passed in a blur of documentation, testing, and preparation. Elena worked with NASA scientists to catalog her innovations, while their legal team investigated AgriCorp's practices. The evidence she'd collected over years finally had official attention. The climactic meeting at the Sandoval Federal Building brought everything to a head. AgriCorp executives faced NASA officials, Department of Agriculture representatives, and environmental investigators. Elena presented her evidence of systematic sabotage designed to force farm sales. These practices don't just threaten family farms, she testified. They endanger the agricultural diversity essential for developing sustainable food systems, whether on Earth or in space. The techniques AgriCorp is suppressing could be crucial for humanity's survival as we expand beyond our planet. The investigation revealed AgriCorp had indeed engaged in illegal practices to force farm acquisitions. Federal injunctions halted their expansion while the Justice Department built its case. Sunset Mesa Farm received emergency protection as a site of national scientific interest. 6 months later, Elena stood in the NASA training facility preparing for her role in Project Oasis. Sunset Mesa Farm had been saved, transformed into a research station where traditional farming wisdom met space-age technology. Her father, Carlos, managed the day-to-day operations while she split her time between the farm and NASA facilities. The drought continued, but the farm thrived with new resources and purpose. Experimental crops developed for Mars missions grew. Alongside traditional varieties, solar arrays powered advanced life support systems. What had once been a failing family farm became a bridge between Earth's agricultural past and humanity's interplanetary future. Elena often thought about that day on Highway 70, fixing a stranger's car in the desert heat. One act of kindness, one moment of connection had changed everything. As she worked on systems designed to feed astronauts on distant worlds, she remembered her grandmother's words, La tierra siempre recompensa a quienes la respetan. The earth always rewards those who respect it. Whether that earth was in New Mexico or on Mars, the principle remained the same. And Elena Reyes, once a struggling farmer's daughter, now helped prepare humanity for its greatest agricultural challenge yet: growing food among the stars. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the workshop floor as Elena tightened the last bolt on the repaired irrigation pump. Her hands moved with practiced precision, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar task even as her mind wandered to the mounting pressures facing Sunset Mesa Farm. The desert heat seemed more oppressive than usual, or perhaps it was the weight of the foreclosure notice that made everything feel heavier these days. Carlos appeared in the workshop doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miguel Santos from the bank called again," he said quietly. "They want to schedule a meeting about our payment options." Elena set down her wrench and wiped sweat from her forehead. "Payment options? That's banker speak for how quickly can you pack up and leave?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. She'd always been the optimistic one, the problem solver who found solutions where others saw only obstacles. "We've survived worse," Carlos replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Remember the drought of 2008? Everyone said we were finished then too." "This is different, Papa. AgriCorp isn't just bad weather. They're systematic, calculated." Elena gestured toward the fields visible through the workshop window. "Look at the Hendersons' old place. Their well worked fine for 60 years until AgriCorp bought the land upstream. Now it's dry as bone." Carlos nodded slowly. "I ran into Tom Henderson at the hardware store last week. He's working as a cashier in Albuquerque now. Said he couldn't bear to drive past his family's land anymore." The weight of that statement hung between them. The Hendersons had farmed the valley almost as long as the Reyes family. Their departure had sent ripples through the remaining independent farmers, each wondering who would be next. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Isabella Torres, her best friend since childhood, who now worked at the Desert Agricultural Research Station. "Strange readings from your sector again. Groundwater contamination spreading. Can you collect samples from your West Irrigation Channel?" "I need to check something," Elena told her father, grabbing her testing kit. The West Channel ran along the property line, shared with AgriCorp's massive operation. If contamination was spreading from their land, it would show up there first. As she walked across the dusty ground, Elena remembered playing in these fields as a child, back when the valley was a patchwork of family farms. Her grandmother, Lucia, had taught her to read the land like a book, how the color of the soil revealed its health, how certain weeds indicated water tables, how the behavior of insects predicted weather changes. "The earth speaks to those who listen," Lucia used to say, "but you have to know its language." Elena had tried to blend that traditional knowledge with modern science, creating a hybrid approach that had kept Sunset Mesa viable longer than many of their neighbors. But even innovation had limits when facing an adversary with seemingly unlimited resources. She reached the West Channel and knelt beside the concrete lining. The water level was lower than it should be, despite the solar-powered pumps running at full capacity. Elena dipped her testing strips and watched the colors change. The results made her stomach clench. Elevated levels of chemicals that had no business being in agricultural water. Her phone rang. Isabella's name appeared on the screen. "Did you get the samples?" her friend asked without preamble. "Testing now. The contamination is worse than last month." "Elena, I need to tell you something, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at the research station tonight after hours?" The urgency in Isabella's voice was unmistakable. "What's going on?" "Just trust me. 8 o'clock. Use the service entrance." The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her phone. Isabella had seemed increasingly troubled lately, hinting at discoveries she couldn't discuss. As a researcher at the station, she had access to data and testing equipment far beyond what Elena could afford. If she'd found something significant. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted Elena's thoughts. 2 white pickup trucks bearing the AgriCorp logo pulled up to the main gate. She recognized Robert Sterling in the lead vehicle, his perfectly pressed shirt and designer sunglasses, a stark contrast to the working farmers of the valley. Elena walked back toward the house, hoping to avoid interaction, but Sterling intercepted her near the equipment shed. "Ms. Reyes," he called out, his voice carrying the false warmth of a practiced salesman. "I was hoping we could have a word." "Mr. Sterling," Elena replied coolly, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" He smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. "I wanted to personally deliver our revised offer for Sunset Mesa Farm. Given the current challenges facing independent operations, we've increased our proposal by 15%. The farm isn't for sale. Everything has a price, Ms. Reyes. Your father is a practical man. Surely he understands that holding on to a failing operation helps no one." Elena felt her temper rising. Failing because of mysterious water contamination? Equipment malfunctions that only affect farms that won't sell? Interesting coincidences, wouldn't you say? Sterling's expression hardened slightly. "Careful with accusations you can't prove. AgriCorp has an excellent legal team that takes defamation very seriously. Is that a threat? It's advice, free of charge." He pulled out a manila envelope. "The offer stands for 1 week. After that, well, market conditions are unpredictable. Values can change rapidly." As Sterling returned to his truck, Elena noticed the second vehicle's occupants taking photographs of the property. Documenting assets for eventual acquisition, no doubt. The vultures were circling, confident in their prey's inevitable fall. That evening, after a tense dinner where Carlos tried to maintain normalcy despite the day's events, Elena drove to the Desert Agricultural Research Station. The facility sat on the outskirts of town, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the traditional adobe buildings of old Desert Springs. She parked behind the maintenance building and made her way to the service entrance. Isabella was waiting, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by nervous energy. "Thanks for coming," Isabella whispered, leading Elena through dimly lit corridors. "I've been documenting something for months, but I needed more evidence before sharing it." They entered Isabella's lab, where multiple computer screens displayed graphs and chemical analyses. Isabella locked the door behind them and activated white noise generators. "Paranoid much?" Elena asked, though her friend's behavior was genuinely concerning. "You have no idea." Isabella pulled up a series of water quality reports. "I've been tracking contamination patterns across the county. Look at this." The screen showed a map with color-coded zones indicating contamination levels. A clear pattern emerged. Every independent farm showed elevated toxicity levels, while AgriCorp properties remained pristine. "But here's what's really interesting," Isabella continued, switching to another display. "The contaminants aren't agricultural runoff or natural minerals. They're synthetic compounds, specifically designed to alter soil pH and disrupt beneficial microorganisms." Elena studied the molecular diagrams. "These look like biological weapons, not farming chemicals." "Exactly. And guess who holds the patent on similar compounds?" Isabella pulled up a document marked Confidential. Biodefense Industries, a subsidiary of the same parent company that owns AgriCorp. The implications were staggering. They're deliberately poisoning farms to force sales. "It's worse than that." Isabella's voice dropped even lower. "I found requisition orders in the station's database. AgriCorp has been using our facility to test these compounds, claiming they're developing drought-resistant soil treatments. The station director signed off on everything." Elena felt sick. The research station was supposed to support local agriculture, not participate in its destruction. "We need to expose this." "With what proof?" "Everything I've shown you was obtained outside official channels. If I go public, I'll lose my job and probably face legal action. AgriCorp's lawyers would bury us both." "So we do nothing? Watch them destroy every family farm in the valley?" Isabella shook her head. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need irrefutable evidence and someone with enough authority to act on it. Otherwise, we're just two young women making accusations against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Elena thought about her grandmother's lessons, about reading the land and understanding its language. The earth keeps its own records, she said slowly. If we can document the contamination patterns, trace them back to their source. That would require extensive sampling, lab analysis, chain of custody documentation. Isabella trailed off, seeing Elena's determined expression. You're going to do it anyway, aren't you? What choice do I have? In 90 days, my family loses everything. If AgriCorp is behind this, I need to prove it before it's too late. Isabella was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I'll help however I can, but we have to be smart about this. One wrong move and AgriCorp will crush us. They spent the next hour planning a systematic approach to gathering evidence. Isabella would continue monitoring official channels while secretly documenting discrepancies. Elena would collect soil and water samples from strategic locations, creating a contamination timeline that could stand up to legal scrutiny. As Elena prepared to leave, Isabella grabbed her arm. There's something else. I've heard rumors about a former AgriCorp scientist who left the company under mysterious circumstances. Dr. Patricia Vance. She might know something about their methods. Where can I find her? That's the problem. She disappeared after leaving AgriCorp, but I have a contact in Phoenix who might know more. I'll make some calls. Driving home under a canopy of stars, Eleanor felt the weight of what she'd learned. David versus Goliath seemed like a fair fight compared to what she faced, but she thought of her father's weathered hands, of the generations who had worked this land, of the community being systematically destroyed by corporate greed. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Eleanor found Carlos in the kitchen, staring at a letter from their insurance company. They're canceling our crop insurance, he said numbly. Says we're too high risk given the water quality issues in the area. Without insurance, they couldn't secure operating loans for the next season. It was another noose tightening around their necks. Elena wondered if AgriCorp had connections in the insurance industry too. Their reach seemed infinite. Papa, she said carefully, what if the water problems aren't natural? What if someone is causing them deliberately? Carlos looked up sharply. That's a dangerous thought, Mija. Even if it's true, proving it would be nearly impossible. But what if we could prove it? What if we had evidence? Her father's expression mixed hope and fear. Against AgriCorp. They have lawyers, politicians, probably judges in their pocket. We're just farmers. We're farmers who know this land better than any corporation ever could, Elena countered. And we're not alone. Isabella found something. At the research station, there are others who know what's happening. Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Your mother would have fought, he said finally. Maria never backed down from bullies no matter how big they were. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother had died when she was 12, but her fierce spirit lived on in family stories. Maria Reyes had organized protests against unfair water allocations, stood up to corrupt officials, and taught her daughter that justice was worth fighting for. Then we fight, Elena said, but we fight smart. That afternoon, she began her systematic collection of evidence. Using GPS coordinates and detailed notes, she gathered samples from multiple locations across Sunset Mesa Farm and neighboring properties. Each sample was photographed, labeled, and stored, according to protocols Isabella had provided. As she worked near the eastern boundary, Elena noticed fresh tire tracks leading onto their property from AgriCorp's land. Following them, she discovered a small metal device partially buried near one of their irrigation channels. It looked like some kind of sensor or monitoring equipment. Elena photographed it from multiple angles before carefully extracting it from the ground. The device bore no obvious markings, but its presence on their property without permission was clearly illegal. She added it to her growing collection of evidence. That evening, Isabella called with news about Dr. Patricia Vance. "My contact came through. Dr. Vance is living in Tucson under a different name. She's willing to meet, but she's terrified of AgriCorp finding her." Why is she hiding? Apparently, she discovered something about their operations that made her a liability. She left with documents they desperately want back. Elena felt a surge of hope. When can I meet her? This weekend, but Elena, be careful. If AgriCorp is willing to destroy entire communities for profit, they won't hesitate to silence individuals who threaten their operations. The warning sent a chill down Elena's spine, but she pushed the fear aside. In 3 days, she would drive to Tucson to meet a woman who might hold the key to saving not just Sunset Mesa Farm, but every independent farm in the valley. That night, as she reviewed her collected evidence, Elena's laptop chimed with an email. Notification. The sender was anonymous, the subject line simply reading, "You're not alone." The message contained a single attachment, a document titled AgriCorp Internal Memo, Project Valley Sweep. With trembling fingers, Elena opened the file. What she read confirmed her worst suspicions and revealed a conspiracy that went far, beyond water contamination. AgriCorp wasn't just acquiring farms, they were preparing for something bigger, something that required complete control of the region's agricultural infrastructure. The memo referenced Phase 2 implementation and federal contract requirements. It mentioned specifications that sounded more military than agricultural. Whatever AgriCorp was planning, it involved the government and had implications far beyond corporate farming. Elena saved multiple copies of the document, knowing she'd stumbled onto something that could change everything. But it also meant the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. This wasn't just about saving family farms anymore. It was about exposing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power. As she prepared for bed, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or suffer consequences." Attached was a photo of her truck parked outside the research station the previous night. They were watching. They knew she was investigating. The threat was clear, but instead of fear, Elena felt a cold determination settle over her. AgriCorp had just confirmed they had something to hide, something worth threatening her to protect. Looking out her window at the moonlit fields of Sunset Mesa Farm, Elena made a silent promise to the land and to her ancestors who had worked it. She would not let their legacy end in corporate theft and environmental destruction. Whatever AgriCorp was planning, whatever powers they had behind them, she would find a way to stop them. The desert highway stretched endlessly toward Tucson, heat mirages dancing on the asphalt like ghostly flames. Elena checked her rearview mirror for the 100th time, half expecting to see AgriCorp vehicles tailing her. The anonymous threat from 2 nights ago had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, but the prospect of meeting Dr. Patricia Vance overshadowed her fear. She'd left before dawn, telling Carlos she was visiting equipment suppliers in Phoenix. The lie tasted bitter, but involving him further seemed needlessly dangerous. The encrypted USB drive containing all her evidence was hidden in a false bottom of her travel mug, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid a week ago, but now felt merely prudent. The meeting location was a small botanical garden on Tucson's east side, chosen by Dr. Vance for its multiple exits and steady flow of visitors. Elena arrived early, parking several blocks away and approaching on foot. She wore sunglasses and a hat, feeling slightly ridiculous, but remembering Isabella's warnings about AgriCorp's reach. The garden was a desert oasis, featuring native plants arranged in artistic displays. Elena found the designated bench near a fountain, pretending to study a plaque about saguaro cacti. while scanning for anyone who looked out of place. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman in her 50s approached, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and carrying a sketchbook. "Beautiful specimens, aren't they?" the woman said, gesturing to the cacti. "Though I prefer the resilience of the barrel cactus, survives where others perish." It was the predetermined phrase. "Dr. Vance?" Elena asked quietly. "Patricia, please. And you must be Elena." She sat down, opening her sketchbook to reveal what looked like botanical drawings, but were actually chemical diagrams. "We don't have much time. What do you know about Project Valley Sweep?" Elena's pulse quickened. "I received an anonymous email with an internal memo. It mentioned Phase 2 implementation and federal contracts." Patricia's face tightened. "Then you know more than most. Valley Sweep isn't just about land acquisition. AgriCorp has a contract with the Department of Defense to develop agricultural security zones, areas where food production can be completely controlled and protected from theoretical biological threats. Biological threats? Or so they claim. The real purpose is testing methods for rapid agricultural conversion in hostile environments. They're using your valley as a proving ground for technologies they plan to deploy overseas. Patricia flipped to another page, revealing a map marked with strategic points. The contamination of independent farms isn't just about forcing sales. They're stress testing their compounds, seeing how quickly they can render land unusable, then restore it under their control. Elena felt sick. We're being used as lab rats? Worse. You're being used to perfect weapons. These compounds could be deployed anywhere: enemy farmland, rebel-controlled regions, even domestic areas during civil unrest. Patricia's voice dropped lower. "I helped develop some of these formulas. Before I understood their true purpose, when I tried to blow the whistle, they destroyed my credibility, threatened my family." "But you kept evidence?" Patricia reached into her bag and pulled out what looked like an ordinary gardening book. The pages have microdots, thousands of documents compressed into tiny dots that look like printing imperfections, laboratory results, emails between executives and military liaisons, financial records showing payments to local officials. Elena accepted the book with trembling hands. "Why give this to me? You don't even know me." "Because you're still fighting. Because your farm is ground zero for Phase 2, and because—" Patricia hesitated. "Because there's something else, something I discovered just before I fled. AgriCorp isn't just working with the Defense Department. They have connections to an international consortium developing food-based weapons. The technology they're testing in your valley is being sold to the highest bidder." The implications were staggering. Elena thought of her father, of Isabella, of all the farmers who had already lost everything. What's Phase 2? Complete environmental reset. They'll trigger a catastrophic contamination event that destroys all crops in the region. Then they'll swoop in as saviors, using their miraculous restoration technology to rebuild the agricultural infrastructure under their complete control. The government will mandate their involvement for national security. When? Soon, within months, possibly weeks. They need to complete acquisition of key properties first. Patricia looked directly at Elena. "Properties like yours. Sunset Mesa Farm sits on a critical aquifer junction. Without it, they can't implement the full contamination protocol." Elena's mind raced. "So if we don't sell, you're not just saving your farm, you're preventing an ecological disaster that would devastate the entire region and provide cover for implementing a system of total agricultural control." A maintenance vehicle entered the garden's parking area, its arrival too precisely timed to be coincidental. Patricia stood quickly. "I've stayed too long. Use what I've given you, but be smart. They have people everywhere: banks, law enforcement, government agencies. Trust no one you don't absolutely have to." "Wait," Elena called as Patricia turned. To leave? How do I contact you if I need more information? Patricia paused. You don't. I'm leaving the country tonight, but there are others. Scientists, farmers, even some government officials who suspect the truth. They'll find you if you start exposing this. She squeezed Elena's shoulder. Be brave, but be careful. What you're fighting is bigger than AgriCorp. It's a vision of the future where food itself becomes a weapon. After Patricia disappeared into the garden paths, Elena sat for several minutes, the gardening book heavy in her lap. The fountain's gentle splash seemed to mock the enormity of what she'd learned. She was a 26-year-old farmer's daughter with an unfinished engineering degree, holding evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and threatened the foundation of agricultural independence. The drive back to Crescent Valley was a blur. Elena's mind churned with the revelations, trying to process how to use the information without painting a larger target on her back. The microdots in the book would need specialized equipment to read, equipment she didn't have access to, but Isabella might know someone who could help. As she neared Desert Springs, Elena noticed a sheriff's cruiser following at a discreet distance. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, but she maintained steady speed, taking her usual route through town. The cruiser eventually peeled off, but the message was clear. She was being watched. Sunset Mesa Farm appeared peaceful in the late afternoon light, but Elena now saw it differently. Every acre represented not just her family's heritage, but a critical piece in a terrifying puzzle. The old windmill, the solar arrays she'd installed, the terraced fields, all of it stood in the path of a plan that would reshape American agriculture forever. Carlos was working on the old tractor when she arrived, grease-stained and focused on replacing worn bearings. He looked up as she approached, reading something in her expression. Equipment suppliers weren't helpful, asked, playing along with her cover story. Actually, I learned about some new technologies, things that could change everything. Elena helped him organize tools, using the familiar task to ground herself. Papa, if you knew something that could hurt us, but might save many others, what would you do? Carlos wiped his hands on a rag, considering. Your mother used to say courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. What did you really learn today, mija? The concern in his voice broke through Elena's defenses. She pulled him into the workshop, away from potential surveillance, and told him everything. Patricia's revelations, the book with microdots, the true purpose of Project Valley Sweep. Carlos listened without interruption, his expression growing graver with each detail. Madre de Dios, he whispered when she finished, and I thought we were just fighting corporate greed. I'm sorry, Papa. I didn't want to involve you further, but no. He gripped her shoulders. We're family. We face this together. But Elena, what you're describing, these people have already destroyed lives to protect smaller secrets. If they learn what you know, then we have to be smarter than they are. Elena pulled out her phone. Isabella has contacts at the university. Someone there might have equipment to read microdots. We need to digitize this evidence, create multiple copies, establish a dead man's switch. A what? An automatic release system. If something happens to us, the information goes public automatically. She was already texting Isabella, using coded phrases they'd agreed upon. We also need allies. Patricia mentioned others who suspect the truth. Over the next several days, Elena and Isabella worked to decode the microdots while maintaining their normal routines. The university contact, a physics professor with a history of activism, provided access to microscopic scanning equipment after hours. What they discovered exceeded even Patricia's warnings. The documents revealed a web of corruption spanning multiple agencies. EPA officials had been bribed to ignore contamination reports. local law enforcement received payments. To discourage investigations, congressional representatives had stock in AgriCorp subsidiaries. Most disturbing were communications between AgriCorp executives and foreign entities discussing deployment of agricultural weapons in conflict zones. "This is insane," Isabella breathed, scrolling through decoded files. "They're talking about using food scarcity as a military tactic, engineered crop failures, targeted famines." Elena studied a schematic showing contamination spread patterns. "Look at this. They've modeled how their compounds move through water tables. Every independent farm in the valley is marked for specific targeting based on soil composition and water access, including yours." Isabella pointed to Sunset Mesa Farm's location. "You're designated as a critical control point. Without your aquifer access, their whole system fails." The professor, Dr. Harrison Webb, entered the lab carrying coffee. "I've been reviewing the chemical formulas. Some of these compounds are modifications of banned biological weapons. If released as planned, the environmental damage would take decades to reverse without their proprietary restoration technology, which they'd control exclusively," Elena finished, "creating a permanent dependency." Dr. Webb adjusted his glasses. "Precisely, and the international implications. If they're selling this technology to foreign powers, we're looking at potential food-based warfare on a global scale." As they compiled the evidence, Elena received another anonymous message. "Federal inspection team arriving Tuesday. Prepare for comprehensive evaluation." The timing couldn't be coincidental. Someone was either warning her or setting a trap. That evening, returning to the farm, Elena found Carlos in intense conversation with several neighboring farmers, who still maintained independent operations. Word of her investigation had spread despite precautions. "They came to offer support," Carlos explained. "Everyone's noticed the patterns: mysterious equipment failures, water problems, crop diseases. They want to fight back." Elena looked at the assembled group. The Garcias, the Patels, the Johnson family. All faced similar pressures from AgriCorp. All stood to lose everything if Project Valley Sweep proceeded. "This is dangerous," she warned them. "AgriCorp has connections we're only beginning to understand. Anyone who joins this fight risks everything." Ben Johnson, whose family had farmed the valley for 80 years, spoke up. "We're already losing everything. Just slowly. If what you've discovered is true, we're not just fighting for our farms anymore. We're fighting for the right to grow food without corporate permission." The group spent hours strategizing. They would document everything, create redundant evidence storage, and establish communication networks that couldn't be easily monitored. Each family would contribute their expertise, legal knowledge, technical skills, political connections. As the meeting concluded, Elena felt a shift in the atmosphere. What had begun as her solitary investigation was becoming a community resistance movement. But she also knew that AgriCorp wouldn't tolerate organized opposition. The next morning brought confirmation of her fears. Isabella called, voice shaking. "The research station was raided last night. Federal agents seized computers, files, everything. They're calling it an investigation into misappropriation of agricultural research funds. Are you safe?" "For now. But Eleanor, they knew exactly what to look for. Someone's been feeding them information." Isabella paused. "There's more. Robert, Sterling was seen meeting with the sheriff yesterday, and there are rumors about emergency council meetings to discuss agricultural security measures." The net was tightening. Elena looked out at her family's fields, where morning mist rose from the irrigation channels like ghostly warnings. In her pocket, the gardening book felt impossibly heavy with its hidden secrets. She thought of Patricia's words about courage and necessity. The Tuesday inspection would likely be a pretext for more aggressive action against the farm. But it also presented an opportunity. If federal agents were coming, she would be ready, not just to defend her property, but to expose the truth they were helping to hide. The next 48 hours would determine everything. Elena began preparing for the most important confrontation of her life, knowing that the fate of independent agriculture might rest on what happened when those federal vehicles rolled onto Sunset Mesa Farm. The evidence was compiled, allies were alerted, and contingency plans were in place. Whatever happened Tuesday, the truth about Project Valley Sweep would not remain buried. Too many lives, too many futures depended on bringing these secrets into the light. Elena touched the soil of her family's land, drawing strength from generations of farmers who had faced their own battles against those who would control the most fundamental human need, the ability to grow food. The storm was coming, but this time she wouldn't face it alone. Tuesday dawned with a sky the color of burnished copper, strange and portentous. Elena had barely slept, her mind racing with contingency plans for the federal inspection team's arrival. The decoded microdot documents lay spread across her desk, categorized by threat level and potential impact. She'd spent the night creating information packets for each of the neighboring farmers who had joined their resistance, ensuring that no single person held all the pieces should AgriCorp's reach prove even longer than they feared. Carlos knocked softly on her bedroom door. "They're coming, Mija." 3 government vehicles just turned onto the main road. Elena tucked the last of the documents into her backpack and joined her father on the porch. The convoy approaching. Sunset Mesa Farm was larger than expected. 5 black SUVs with federal markings, 2 white AgriCorp pickup trucks, and what appeared to be a mobile laboratory vehicle. Dust billowed behind them like the warning clouds of an approaching storm. "Too many vehicles," Carlos muttered. "This isn't a standard inspection." Elena nodded grimly. "They know something's happening. Isabella texted an hour ago. The research station is crawling with auditors, and someone broke into her apartment last night. Is she safe? She's with Dr. Webb at the university. They're analyzing the last of the soil samples." Elena squared her shoulders as the vehicles pulled up to the property entrance. "Remember the plan. I'll handle the officials. If anything goes wrong, I know. Activate the dead man's switch and get to the rendezvous point." Carlos gripped her hand briefly. "Your mother would be proud of you, Elena, whatever happens today." The lead SUV stopped in front of the house, and a tall woman in a charcoal suit emerged. She carried herself with the unmistakable authority of federal law enforcement, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses despite the early hour. "Ms. Reyes?" She approached the porch, badge extended. "Special Agent Vanessa Reynolds, Environmental Protection Division. We're here to conduct a comprehensive inspection following reports of chemical contamination originating from this property." Elena blinked in surprise. "Contamination from our property? That's factually impossible. We're the victims of contamination, not the source." Agent Reynolds' expression remained impassive. "We have satellite imagery and water quality reports suggesting otherwise. AgriCorp has filed formal complaints alleging that your experimental irrigation systems are leaching prohibited compounds into the regional aquifer." From the second vehicle, Robert Sterling emerged, a familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. 2 men in AgriCorp security uniforms flanked him, along with a nervous-looking man in a lab coat clutching a tablet computer. "Ms. Reyes," Sterling called out with false cordiality. "I hope you'll cooperate fully with this investigation. The health of the entire valley's agricultural system is at stake." The audacity of the accusation momentarily stole Elena's breath. AgriCorp wasn't just denying their own contamination activities. They were actively framing Sunset Mesa Farm as the culprit. It was a strategy as brilliant as it was despicable, using the very government agencies that should be investigating them as weapons against their opposition. "Of course we'll cooperate," Elena replied evenly. "We have nothing to hide. In fact, we've been documenting unusual chemical signatures in our soil and water for months, all originating from upstream properties owned by AgriCorp." Agent Reynolds removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that assessed everything with clinical precision. "Then you won't mind if my team collects samples and examines your irrigation system. We'll need full access to your records, equipment, and storage facilities." By all means," Elena gestured toward the property. "My father will show your technical team our irrigation systems. I'm happy to provide our documentation and testing results." As the federal agents dispersed across the property, Elena noted, with growing concern, that they seemed more interested in collecting evidence than conducting a neutral inspection. They photographed equipment, took samples from specific locations that aligned with AgriCorp's accusations, and carefully documented the solar-powered irrigation system she'd designed. Sterling approached her as she watched the proceedings. His designer sunglasses pushed up on his perfectly coiffed hair. "Impressive setup you have here. Shame it's being misused." "The only misuse happening in this valley is AgriCorp's deliberate contamination of independent farms," Elena replied quietly. "We both know what Project Valley Sweep really is, Sterling. The question is whether these federal agents do." The slightest flicker of surprise crossed his face before smoothing into practiced nonchalance. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'd be careful making accusations without evidence. That's how costly lawsuits happen." "Oh, I have evidence, more than you can imagine." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Did you really think Dr. Vance would disappear without leaving insurance, or that your monitoring devices on our property would go unnoticed?" Sterling's composure cracked momentarily, a flash of genuine concern in his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ms. Reyes. People with far more resources and influence than you have tried to interfere with AgriCorp's operations. They didn't fare well." "Is that a threat, Mr. Sterling? A statement of fact? AgriCorp provides food security for millions. The government understands our strategic importance. A few troublesome farmers won't change that." Before Elena could respond, Agent Reynolds approached, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Reyes, we need to discuss some concerning readings from your western field. Would you accompany me?" Elena followed the agent, acutely aware of Sterling watching them with calculated interest. The western field bordered AgriCorp's property, where Elena had found the strange monitoring device weeks earlier. It was also where the contamination levels had been highest in her own testing. At the field's edge, Reynolds stopped and surveyed the landscape. Without looking at Elena, she spoke quietly. "This inspection isn't what you think it is. I think it's AgriCorp using federal agencies to eliminate opposition to their Project Valley Sweep," Elena replied evenly. "The question is whether you're a willing participant or an unwitting tool." Reynolds turned, something like respect flickering in her eyes. "3 months ago, I received an anonymous file containing partial documentation of a classified agricultural project with disturbing implications. Since then, I've been building a case quietly, gathering evidence without alerting those involved." Elena studied the agent carefully, looking for signs of deception. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because someone up my chain of command compromised this investigation. We were supposed to inspect AgriCorp's facilities today, not yours. The orders were changed last night, and half my team was replaced with agents I've never worked with." Reynolds glanced toward the house, where Sterling was now speaking with one of the other agents. "I need to know what evidence you have about Project Valley Sweep." "How do I know this isn't an elaborate trap? that you're not working for AgriCorp." Reynolds reached into her jacket and withdrew a small digital recorder. "Because I've been recording every conversation since I arrived, including Sterling's thinly veiled threat to you. Now I'm recording myself telling you that I believe AgriCorp is developing agricultural bioweapons under the guise of corporate farming, and I need your help to prove it before they frame you for environmental crimes and seize this property." The bold move caught Elena off guard. If Reynolds was bluffing, she'd just incriminated herself on her own recording device. It was either a display of extraordinary trust or an extremely complex deception. "I have decoded documents from Dr. Patricia Vance," Elena said finally. "Complete blueprints of Project Valley Sweep, including the chemical formulations they're using to contaminate independent farms and their connections to military contractors and foreign governments." Reynolds' eyes widened slightly. "Vance is alive. Everyone at the EPA believes she died in that lab accident last year. Very much alive and determined to expose AgriCorp's real agenda. She passed me evidence, including microdots containing thousands of internal documents. I need to see those immediately. If what you're saying is true, this property isn't safe. Sterling didn't come here to inspect. He came to find and destroy evidence before we could secure it." Elena hesitated, years of suspicion toward authority figures warring with the urgent need for allies. "I've distributed copies to trusted partners. If anything happens to me or my father, all the evidence goes public immediately." "Smart," Reynolds nodded approvingly. "But now we need to act. My team includes 2 agents I trust implicitly. The others..." She glanced toward the house where several agents were conferring with the AgriCorp representatives. "I'm not sure where their loyalties lie. What do you suggest?" "A diversion. I'll direct my trusted agents to continue the inspection along the southern boundary. That should draw attention away from the house. Can you retrieve your evidence without being noticed?" Elena considered the property layout. "There's a maintenance tunnel under the old windmill. It leads back to the equipment shed. I can access it without crossing open ground." "Good. Meet me at my vehicle in 20 minutes. And Ms. Reyes, if this goes sideways, make sure those distributed copies reach people who can act on them." As Reynolds walked away, Elena texted Carlos a pre-arranged code phrase: "Windmill needs maintenance." It was their signal that the contingency plan was in motion. Carlos would engage the AgriCorp personnel with questions about their accusations, creating additional distraction while Elena retrieved the evidence. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and dusty, a remnant from the farm's early days when her great-grandfather had created underground irrigation access points. Elena crawled through the narrow passage, emerging behind the equipment shed where her backpack waited with the essential documents. As she collected the evidence, movement at the property entrance caught her attention. 3 additional vehicles had arrived, unmarked black SUVs with tinted windows. Men in tactical gear emerged, their movements suggesting military or specialized law enforcement training. Elena's heart pounded. The situation was escalating faster than anticipated. She slipped from the shed, keeping to the shadows of the equipment yard, and made her way toward Reynolds' vehicle parked at the edge of the property. The agent was already waiting, watching the new arrivals with evident concern. "Private security contractors," Reynolds said as Elena approached. "AgriCorp uses them for special operations. This is moving faster than I expected. We need to leave now. Not without my father." "Ms. Reyes, I'm not negotiable on this point, Agent Reynolds. We leave together or not at all." Reynolds assessed the situation, then nodded. "I'll create a distraction. When I give the signal, get your father to my vehicle. We'll exit through the north access road." Before Elena could respond, shouting erupted near the house. Through breaks in the equipment, she saw Carlos confronting Sterling, gesturing angrily toward the newly arrived security contractors. Several federal agents were moving to intervene, while others hung back, seemingly unsure whose authority applied. "That's our distraction," Reynolds said grimly. "Go now." Elena moved quickly through the equipment yard, circling toward the house from the west side, where vegetation provided cover. She could hear her father's voice, unnaturally loud, maintaining the diversion while watching for her approach. "You have no right to bring armed men onto my property," Carlos shouted. "This is supposed to be an environmental inspection, not a military operation." Sterling's reply was too low to hear, but his body language suggested veiled threats. Security contractors had established positions around the property perimeter, effectively blocking normal exit routes. Elena reached the edge of the garden and whistled a pattern that mimicked the canyon wrens common to the area. Carlos glanced in her direction, nodding almost imperceptibly. He began backing toward her position, continuing his protest to maintain attention on himself. "Ms. Reyes," a voice spoke directly behind her. Elena whirled to find one of the federal agents, a younger woman with short blonde hair. "Agent Reynolds sent me. There's a change of plans. We need to move now." "Who are you?" "Agent Sarah Carter. I've been working with Reynolds on the AgriCorp investigation for months. Those contractors aren't just security. They're retrieval specialists. They're here for Dr. Vance's documents." A retrieval team explained the military precision of their movements. AgriCorp wasn't just trying to frame Sunset Mesa Farm. They were mounting an operation to seize all evidence of Project Valley Sweep. "How did they know about the documents?" Agent Carter's expression turned grim. "They've had your property under surveillance for weeks. Directional microphones, thermal imaging. They probably knew about your meeting with Dr. Vance within hours of it happening." The revelation sent ice through Elena's veins. If AgriCorp had been monitoring them so closely, they might already know about the distributed evidence copies, the rendezvous points, everything. "Where's Reynolds now?" "Creating our exit route. We need to move before they secure the entire perimeter." Carlos had nearly reached their position when one of the security contractors spotted the exchange and raised the alarm. Suddenly, the pretense of an inspection evaporated. Contractors moved with purpose toward them, while confused federal agents began demanding explanations. Agent Carter drew her sidearm. "Change of plans. Head for the irrigation channels. We can follow them to the property boundary." Carlos reached them, breathing heavily. "They're searching the house, looking for something specific." "The documents," Elena explained. "They know about Dr. Vance." "Then we can't let them catch us." Carlos led them toward a dense stand of mesquite trees that concealed one of the main irrigation channels. "This way. The channel widens near the old reservoir. We can follow it, off the property." They moved as quickly as possible without breaking cover, the sounds of the confrontation at the house growing more distant. Elena could hear vehicles being repositioned, radios crackling with tactical communications. The inspection had become an outright raid. The irrigation channel provided good concealment, its banks high enough to shield them from view as they crouched and moved along the concrete trough. Ahead, Elena could see where the channel passed under the property fence, wide enough for a person to navigate if they didn't mind getting wet. Just as they reached this point, Reynolds appeared on the other side of the fence, her suit dusty, and a small cut bleeding on her cheek. "Hurry! They've deployed drones to search the property." One by one, they slipped through the channel opening. Reynolds helped them up the opposite bank, where a nondescript sedan waited on the dirt access road. "What about the other agents?" Elena asked as they climbed into the vehicle. "Compromised or contained?" Reynolds replied grimly, starting the engine. "AgriCorp has influence in places I didn't anticipate. When we couldn't find the documents, at your house, Sterling made a call. That's when the contractors switched from search to seizure operations. Carlos looked back at the farm as they pulled away. Everything we've built, our home. We'll get it back, Papa, Elena promised, though uncertainty gnawed at her. AgriCorp's reach seemed to extend everywhere, even into federal law enforcement. Where could they possibly be safe? As if reading her thoughts, Reynolds spoke. We're going to a secure location. One of the few places AgriCorp can't reach. The White Sands testing facility. The NASA complex, Elena asked in surprise. It's the only federal installation in the region not compromised by AgriCorp's influence. I have a contact there, someone who's been investigating their activities from another angle. The desert landscape blurred past as Reynolds drove at high speed, taking unpaved back roads to avoid main highways where AgriCorp might have established checkpoints. Elena's phone buzzed with messages from the farmer network, reports of similar raids happening simultaneously across the valley. AgriCorp was moving against everyone connected to her investigation. They're burning everything to the ground, she whispered, scrolling through the updates. The Johnson's farm is on fire. The Patels have been arrested. It's a coordinated attack, which means they're desperate, Reynolds said. They wouldn't risk exposure on this scale unless they believed we had something that could destroy them completely. We do, Elena confirmed, patting her backpack. Dr. Vance didn't just provide evidence about agricultural contamination. She gave us proof that AgriCorp is selling genetic modification technology to countries under international sanctions, technology that could be weaponized to target specific crop strains. Reynolds' hands tightened on the steering wheel. Agricultural terrorism, the ability to destroy a nation's food supply without conventional weapons. Exactly. Phase 2 of Project Valley Sweep wasn't just about controlling this valley's farms. It was a field test for techniques they planned to market globally. The enormity of the conspiracy seemed to fill the vehicle. Carlos, who had been quietly processing everything, finally spoke. How can we fight something this big? They have governments, military contractors, law enforcement all in their pocket. Not everyone, Reynolds replied. There are still people in positions of power who understand the threat this represents. People who've been building cases quietly, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. And now is that moment, Elena asked. Now we have no choice. AgriCorp has shown its hand. They can't put this genie back in the bottle without eliminating everyone who knows the truth. She glanced at Elena in the rearview mirror. That's why White Sands is our only option. It's beyond AgriCorp's reach because it deals with something even more powerful than food, space. The White Sands testing facility appeared on the horizon, its security perimeter a stark contrast to the surrounding desert. Reynolds approached the main gate and presented identification that seemed to surprise even the guards. After a brief radio consultation, they were waved through with an escort vehicle leading the way. Elena had expected to be taken to a security office or administrative building. Instead, their escort led them to a section of the facility dedicated to agricultural research, where experimental greenhouses and climate-controlled chambers spread across several acres. What is this place? She asked as they parked. NASA's Extraterrestrial Agriculture Division, Reynolds replied, where they develop methods for growing food in space, on lunar bases, eventually on Mars. My contact is the director. They were led into a modern laboratory building where researchers in NASA polo shirts worked among sophisticated equipment and plant specimens. At the center of the main lab, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair was examining data on multiple screens. He looked up as they entered, his eyes widening in recognition. You made it, he said to Reynolds. When we heard about the raids, it was close, Reynolds admitted. Dr. Marcus Chen, I'd like you to meet Elena and Carlos Reyes from Sunset Mesa Farm. Elena stared in shock. You're Dr. Chen, the The stranded motorist with the Tesla. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? Dr. Chen had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Not entirely. We'd been monitoring unusual irrigation patterns in the region. Your solar-powered system caught our satellite team's attention. The car trouble was genuine, but I'd been hoping to find a way to speak with you. You've been investigating AgriCorp too? Carlos asked. From a different angle, Chen confirmed. NASA initially became interested because of water usage anomalies that showed up in our resource monitoring satellites. When we looked closer, we found contamination patterns that matched known bioweapon signatures, specifically anti-crop agents developed during the Cold War. He led them to a secure conference room where screens displayed satellite imagery of Crescent Valley, with overlays showing contamination spread patterns. We've been mapping this covertly for months. The pattern is unmistakable. Systematic contamination radiating from AgriCorp properties and targeting specific independent farms. But why is NASA involved? Elena asked. This seems outside your jurisdiction. 2 reasons, Chen replied. First, any potential bioweapon development on US soil falls under national security concerns, which includes our operations. Second, and more importantly, the techniques you've developed to maintain crop viability despite contamination are directly relevant to our Mars agriculture program. He brought up images of Elena's irrigation system captured by satellite. Your integration of traditional water conservation methods with modern solar technology achieves efficiency rates we haven't been able to replicate in our controlled environments. You've created a system that thrives under adverse conditions. Exactly what we need for Mars colonization. The revelation was almost too much to process. While Elena had been fighting to save her family's farm, NASA had been studying her innovations as potential solutions for growing food on another planet. So, when you met me on the highway, I was genuinely impressed by your engineering expertise, Chen finished. But I couldn't reveal why I was really in the area, not until we understood the full scope of AgriCorp's activities. Reynolds spread out printed copies of some of the microdot documents Elena had recovered. AgriCorp isn't just developing agricultural bioweapons, Dr. Chen. They're selling the technology internationally. Chen's expression darkened as he examined the evidence. This confirms our worst fears. They're not just testing these compounds. They're creating a market for technologies that could cause global food system collapse. For the next several hours, they compiled evidence from multiple sources. Elena's documents from Dr. Vance, NASA's satellite monitoring data, Reynolds' investigation files, and intelligence gathered by Chen's team. The picture that emerged was more disturbing than any of them had imagined individually. Project Valley Sweep was part of a much larger initiative called Harvest Control. AgriCorp had been developing and testing methods to manipulate agricultural production on a macro scale. Techniques that could destroy competitors' crops, create artificial scarcity to drive up prices, or even target the food security of entire nations. This isn't just corporate crime, Chen said as they reviewed the compiled evidence. It's a direct threat to global stability. Food weaponization has been theorized for decades, but this is the first concrete evidence of operationalized techniques. And Sunset Mesa Farm became a target because, Elena began. Because your innovations were creating resilience they couldn't control, Chen explained. Your farming methods, combining traditional knowledge with modern technology, represented a direct threat to their control model. If other farmers adopted your approaches, their contamination methods would become ineffective. Carlos, who had been quietly absorbing the enormity of the situation, finally spoke. So what happens now? AgriCorp has effectively seized our farm. They're arresting our allies. How do we fight back? With this, Reynolds gestured to the compiled evidence. We've established secure communication with the Attorney General's office. They're preparing for simultaneous raids on AgriCorp facilities in multiple states, but they needed ironclad evidence, which we now have. How long? Elena asked. They're mobilizing as we speak. Federal teams should be in position by morning. Chen added, in the meantime, we need to protect you and process the technical evidence. AgriCorp will be searching for you with everything they have. This facility is secure, but we should prepare for their attempts to discredit or eliminate witnesses before the federal case proceeds. As night fell, Elena found herself in a NASA guest quarter, surrounded by the strange juxtaposition of space program memorabilia and desert landscape visible through reinforced windows. Carlos had finally fallen asleep in the adjoining room, exhaustion overcoming even the stress of losing their home. Elena couldn't sleep. She sat reviewing copies of the evidence they'd compiled, still processing the weird turn her life had taken. A month ago, she'd been a farmer's daughter fighting for closure. Now she was at a NASA facility, involved in exposing a conspiracy that threatened global food security, while her innovative irrigation system was being studied for potential Mars colonization. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Chen stood outside holding 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might still be awake. Mind some company? Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. I can't stop thinking about the others. The Johnsons, the Patels, all the farmers who joined our resistance. AgriCorp is destroying everything they've built. Agent Reynolds has been working to secure their release and protection, Chen assured her. With the evidence we've compiled, federal authorities can intervene with proper justification. If we're not too late. Elena sipped the coffee, letting its warmth and caffeine combat her exhaustion. I still don't understand how AgriCorp gained so much power. How did they infiltrate government agencies, law enforcement, everything? Chen's expression turned contemplative. Food is the ultimate control mechanism, Ms. Reyes. Whoever controls food production controls population movements, political stability, national security. AgriCorp didn't just buy farms, they purchased influence in every sector that intersects with agriculture. Water rights, transportation infrastructure, research institutions, regulatory agencies. And no one noticed? Many noticed. Some tried to sound alarms, but the connections were obscured through subsidiaries, partnerships, and shell corporations. It took dedicated investigators like Agent Reynolds years to piece together the network. Elena thought about Patricia Vance, risking everything to expose the truth, and all the farmers who had lost their livelihoods standing against AgriCorp's expansion. What happens to Sunset Mesa Farm? Assuming we succeed, that AgriCorp is stopped. Can we get our home back? That's one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you tonight, Chen said, setting down his coffee. NASA has been authorized to establish a terrestrial research station for the Mars Agricultural Sustainability Program. We need a location with certain characteristics, specific soil compositions, established irrigation infrastructure, and, most importantly, innovative local expertise. Elena stared at him, the implications slowly dawning. You want to use Sunset Mesa Farm? We want to partner with you and your father. The farm would remain yours, but with federal research designation and funding. You'd continue your agricultural innovations with NASA support, helping develop technologies that could feed the first human colony on Mars. The proposal was so unexpected that Elena found herself speechless. All her life, she'd fought to preserve her family's farming legacy. The idea that their work could extend beyond Earth, that techniques developed over generations in the New Mexico desert might someday feed astronauts on another planet. It seemed impossible. Why us? She finally managed. because you've already accomplished what our best scientists haven't, creating a genuinely resilient agricultural system using minimal resources. Your integration of traditional farming knowledge with modern technology represents exactly the approach we need for Mars colonization. We can't transport industrial agriculture to another planet. We need adaptive, innovative approaches that work with unfamiliar environments. Outside the window, the desert. Night sky revealed stars with unusual clarity. Elena thought about her grandmother's lessons on reading the land, her mother's fierce dedication to protecting their heritage, her own dreams of blending tradition and innovation. Perhaps this partnership was the evolution of everything they had worked for. "I'll need to discuss it with my father," she said finally, "but I think he'd see the potential. We've always believed farming is about more than just growing food. It's about sustaining communities, preserving knowledge, building futures. Even if those communities are millions of miles away," Chen nodded. "That's exactly the perspective we need." As dawn approached, bringing with it the promise of federal action against AgriCorp, Elena found herself standing at a literal and figurative crossroads. The fight to save Sunset Mesa Farm had transformed into something far larger, a battle for food sovereignty that spanned from the New Mexico desert to the dusty plains of Mars. Morning brought a flurry of activity as federal operations against AgriCorp began across multiple states. From the Secure Communications Center at White Sands, Elena, Carlos, and the NASA team watched events unfold in real time. AgriCorp's headquarters in Chicago was surrounded by federal agents. Executives were taken into custody. Research facilities were secured, documents seized, computer systems locked down. In Crescent Valley, special teams moved to secure contaminated sites and collect additional evidence. The farmers who had been detained were released into protective custody, and emergency remediation efforts began on properties damaged during the raids. Robert Sterling was arrested at the Desert Springs Hotel, where he'd established his temporary command center. News footage showed him being led to a federal vehicle. His corporate composure finally shattered as he shouted about national security imperatives and agricultural sovereignty. By mid-afternoon, the Attorney General held a press conference announcing the charges against AgriCorp: conspiracy to develop biological weapons, environmental terrorism, industrial espionage, corruption of federal officials, and multiple violations of international agricultural treaties. This investigation has uncovered one of the most far-reaching corporate conspiracies in American history, the Attorney General stated. AgriCorp's leadership wasn't just engaging in anti-competitive practices, they were developing and deploying technologies that threatened global food security for profit. Watching from White Sands, Elena felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the truth was finally exposed, grief for all that had been lost in the process, uncertainty about what would come next. The farm they'd returned to would never be the same, physically or symbolically. As the press conference concluded, Agent Reynolds approached with news. "They've secured Sunset Mesa Farm. The contamination teams are already working to neutralize the compounds in your soil and water system. Early reports suggest the damage can be reversed more quickly than expected thanks to your innovative irrigation design." "When can we go home?" Carlos asked, the longing evident in his voice. "Tomorrow, if you'd like. You'll have a security detail until all AgriCorp operatives are accounted for, but the immediate danger has passed." Carlos nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I never thought I'd miss that old house so much." Elena turned to Dr. Chen. "And the NASA research station proposal, is that still viable given everything that's happened?" "More than ever," Chen confirmed. "Your farm's strategic importance has only been highlighted by these events. The resilience you've demonstrated is exactly what we need to study for Mars agriculture." The next morning, Elena and Carlos returned to Sunset Mesa Farm, escorted by federal agents. The property showed signs of the confrontation: trampled crops, equipment moved for the search operations, the scars of AgriCorp's desperate attempt to seize evidence. But the land itself endured, as it had through generations of challenges. Teams of environmental scientists were already at work testing soil and water, implementing remediation protocols, documenting the contamination patterns for the federal case. Among them were university researchers, including Isabella, now officially part of the recovery effort. "They want me to head the soil remediation team," Isabella told Elena as they walked the property boundaries. "Apparently, my unauthorized research into AgriCorp's contamination methods makes me uniquely qualified to reverse them." "You risked everything to help us," Elena said. "I'll never forget that. We all did what was necessary. And now," Isabella gestured toward the NASA vehicles parked near the house. "Now your work will help feed people on Mars. That's a plot twist I didn't see coming." Over the following weeks, Sunset Mesa Farm transformed again. The contamination was methodically neutralized using techniques developed by Patricia Vance, who had emerged from hiding to assist the federal case. The irrigation system was restored and enhanced with NASA technology while preserving Elena's original design principles. A small research facility took shape near the old equipment shed, staffed by scientists studying the integration of traditional farming methods with space-age technology. Carlos found himself teaching NASA experts about desert agriculture techniques, passed down through generations, while Elena worked with engineers to adapt her innovations for Martian conditions. 3 months after the raids, Sunset Mesa Farm held an unusual harvest celebration. The fields were producing again, the contamination remediated more successfully than anyone had predicted. The farmers of Crescent Valley gathered to mark not just survival, but evolution, their community forever changed by the fight against AgriCorp, but emerging stronger and more connected. As the sun set over the western fields, Elena stood with Dr. Chen, watching researchers collect data from experimental plots where crops were being grown in simulated Martian soil conditions. "We've identified 16 distinct techniques from your traditional farming methods that outperform our engineered solutions," Chen remarked. "Your grandmother's approach to water conservation alone has improved our efficiency projections by 30%. She would have loved knowing her methods might feed people on Mars someday," Elena replied. "Though she probably would have just said, 'Hungry people are hungry people, no matter what planet they're on.'" Chen laughed. "Practical wisdom, exactly what we need for space colonization." From across the property, federal vehicles approached bearing official government markings. Agent Reynolds emerged from the lead car, accompanied by several people in formal attire. "The NASA Director and Deputy Secretary of Agriculture," Chen explained. "They've come to officially designate Sunset Mesa Farm as the terrestrial Mars Agricultural Research Station." As the officials toured the property, Elena found herself watching with mixed emotions. The farm would continue. The land would be protected. Their innovations would contribute to humanity's expansion into space. Yet something fundamental had changed. Their private struggle to preserve a family legacy had become part of a much larger story. Carlos joined her, seeming to read her thoughts. "Your mother used to say that every generation faces different challenges on the same land. For your great-grandparents, it was surviving drought. For your grandparents, it was modernization. For us, it was corporate agriculture. And for me, it's helping feed astronauts on Mars," Elena finished with a small smile. "The land endures," Carlos said, echoing his own father's favorite phrase. "Whatever name they give this place, whatever research they conduct here, it remains Sunset Mesa Farm at its heart, and we remain its stewards." The designation ceremony was brief but meaningful. the NASA director spoke about the critical importance of agricultural innovation for space exploration. The deputy secretary emphasized the need to preserve traditional farming knowledge in an age of corporate consolidation. Agent Reynolds, now heading a new division focused on agricultural security threats, acknowledged the courage of those who had stood against AgriCorp's schemes. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she found herself thinking about that moment on Highway 70, stopping to help a stranded motorist as her family farm faced foreclosure. How that simple act of kindness had set in motion events that changed everything. "Farming has always been about faith in the future," she told the assembled guests. "You plant seeds believing in harvest, even when conditions seem impossible. My ancestors came to this valley believing they could grow food in the desert. Now we're extending that belief to the stars." She gestured toward the experimental fields where traditional crops grew alongside Martian test plots. The challenges of growing food on another planet aren't so different from what farmers have always faced: hostile conditions, limited resources, the need to adapt and innovate. The difference is perspective. What seems impossible becomes possible when we combine ancient wisdom with new technology, when we respect traditional knowledge while embracing the future. As night fell over Sunset Mesa Farm, now officially the terrestrial Mars Agricultural Research Station, Elena stood on the porch where generations of her family had watched the same stars. She thought about the journey from that copper sky, morning when federal agents arrived searching for evidence, to this moment of transformation and possibility. The years passed, and the former Sunset Mesa Farm flourished in its new incarnation. The terrestrial Mars Agricultural Research Station had become a global center for sustainable farming innovation, drawing scientists and agricultural experts from around the world. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into humanity's best hope for feeding the first extraterrestrial colony. 5 years after the AgriCorp conspiracy was exposed, Elena stood on the observatory platform constructed near her old workshop, watching researchers tend experimental plots. Under the New Mexico sun, each section represented a different Martian environmental challenge. Low light conditions, toxic soil compositions, extreme temperature variations. Yet in each plot, crops grew with surprising vigor, defying conventional agricultural wisdom. "The soil remediation process is complete," Isabella announced, joining Elena on the platform. Now the research station's environmental director, Isabella, had transformed her rogue investigation skills into a distinguished scientific career. "The last traces of AgriCorp's compounds are gone. Your family's land is officially cleaner than it was before they started contaminating it." Elena nodded, feeling a particular satisfaction in this milestone. It's fitting that the technology developed to heal this land will help grow food on Mars. Destruction transformed into creation. Carlos approached, accompanied by Dr. Chen and a group of NASA officials in formal attire. The years had added silver to Carlos's hair, but farming in partnership with NASA had returned vigor to his step and purpose to his days. He had become an unlikely ambassador between traditional agricultural knowledge and space exploration technology. "They're ready for you in the main facility," Carlos told Elena. "The director says the announcement can't wait." The main research building, constructed where the old equipment shed once stood, bustled with activity as NASA personnel prepared for a global broadcast. Elena had grown accustomed to media attention as the station's innovations made headlines, but today's event felt different, charged with anticipation and carefully guarded secrecy. Dr. Chen met her at the entrance, his expression both solemn and excited. "The Mars Colonial Authority made their decision last night. I wanted you to hear it from me first. They've selected the agricultural system for the first colony," Elena guessed. For 3 years, research stations around the world had competed to develop the most efficient, resilient food production methods for Mars. The Sunset Mesa approach, integrating traditional knowledge with cutting-edge technology, had consistently outperformed more conventionally engineered solutions. Not just selected it, Chen replied. They want the system's designer to implement it personally. Elena, they're offering you a position on the first Mars mission. You would design and establish the colonial agricultural system that will feed the first 100 settlers. The world seemed to stop. Elena had devoted herself to creating farming methods that could work on Mars, but she had never imagined actually going there herself. The research station, the land her family had worked for generations, had always been her home and future. Me? On Mars? Your integration of traditional techniques with space technology has proven more successful than any pure engineering approach. The selection committee believes the first colonial farm needs your intuitive understanding, not just your technical designs. Chen hesitated. It's a 10-year commitment. 2 years of specialized training, 8 months of transit, and the rest establishing the agricultural systems on Martian soil. Carlos stepped forward, grasping his daughter's hands. Your mother would be so proud. She always said you had your eyes on the horizon. What about the research station? My work here? The station would continue its mission, Chen assured her. Your father has agreed to lead the traditional knowledge integration program, and Isabella would advance to assistant director. Your work here would inform everything we do moving forward. Elena turned to look out the window at the land that had defined her family for generations. The terraced fields her great-grandfather had designed. The irrigation channels her grandmother had mapped with intuitive precision. The solar arrays she had installed during those desperate days, fighting foreclosure. All of it now served a purpose far beyond mere survival. When do I need to decide? They need an answer within the week, Chen replied. But today's announcement will simply confirm that the Sunset Mesa agricultural system has been selected. Your personal involvement would be announced later, if you accept. The global broadcast that afternoon celebrated the selection of the terrestrial Mars Agricultural Research Station's integrated farming system as humanity's first extraterrestrial agricultural model. News outlets marveled at how traditional farming techniques from a modest New Mexico farm had outperformed billion-dollar corporate research programs. After the formal presentations, Elena slipped away from the crowds and walked to the far western boundary of the property. There, overlooking the valley where AgriCorp had once plotted to control all food production, she found the quiet space she needed to consider the extraordinary offer. A Mars colonist. Not just a farmer or researcher, but among the first humans to establish permanent residence on another planet. The engineering challenges alone were staggering, but the deeper questions weighed more heavily. What did it mean to carry Earth's agricultural traditions to another world? What wisdom would be essential, and what practices would need to evolve? Carlos found her there as the sun began to set, the desert light painting the landscape in shades of copper and gold. You're thinking about your grandmother, he said, not a question, but a recognition. Elena nodded. She taught me that farming isn't just technique, it's relationship. Understanding the land, respecting its patterns, adapting to its needs. How do you build that relationship with a planet humans have never farmed before? The same way our ancestors did when they came to this desert, Carlos replied. With humility, observation, and courage. They faced an environment that seemed impossible too. They stood in silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The research station behind them hummed with activity, scientists working late into the evening, preparing humanity's first extraterrestrial farm. Before them stretched the open desert, ancient and enduring, its harsh beauty a reminder of what determined innovation could accomplish. "I think I'll accept," Elena said finally. "Not just for the challenge or the honor, but because someone needs to ensure that when humans bring agriculture to another planet, we do it right from the beginning. No AgriCorp, no exploitation, just sustainable, respectful farming that works. With the environment, not against it." Carlos embraced her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your mother used to say that farmers are the original optimists, planting seeds and believing in harvests that aren't guaranteed. Now her daughter will plant the first seeds on Mars." 1 week later, Elena Reyes signed the formal agreement with the Mars Colonial Authority. In 18 months, she would begin the journey from the New Mexico desert to the red plains of another world, carrying with her the agricultural wisdom of generations of Earth farmers. That evening, she stood once more at the western boundary, watching another desert sunset. The land that had nearly been lost to corporate greed would now help humanity take its next great leap. And Elena, daughter of farmers, would carry the seeds of Earth to the soil of Mars. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.